Hello, my name is Rosalind Love and I'm from the Department of Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic, known as ASNC for short. And I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Judy Quinn. Hi, Judy. Could you tell us which part of the ASNC course you're responsible for, please?
Yes, thanks, Ros. I teach Old Norse language and literature, which we teach in all 3 years in the course on Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic here.
Fantastic. And how does Old Norse fit in with the rest of the course?
It fits in terms of language, the study of languages, and also in terms of literary culture. And it sort of follows through on one of the 3 or 4 language areas that we cover in the ASNC course. So it's a Scandinavian dimension, if you like. And despite their geographical separation, the interaction of Scandinavia and Anglo-Saxon and Irish sort of polities was really significant in the early medieval period, beginning, of course, with Viking raids, but developing into settlements and integration in large parts of Britain and Ireland. So the literature and culture of the Scandinavian homelands would have added to the multicultural mix of the ever-changing culture of Britain. But as well as that, the influence of the language of Scandinavian settlers on early English was really profound. And we know this from changes to the English language that reflect Scandinavian features and vocabulary. And those effects on the language generally emerge after the period of Old English, and we might assume there was also significant cultural influence as well, even if it didn't always surface in the kinds of texts recorded in England and Ireland at the time. Right. So the study of Old Norse is interesting because so much Old Norse vocabulary is now familiar from modern English, and because it's structurally similar to Old English, making the study of the 2 languages a frequent pairing, though students also pair Old Norse with other languages like Irish or Latin.
Yeah. How does the literature in Old Norse compare with the literatures in the other languages that we study in ASNC?
Well, there are a lot of similarities, but there are also quite significant differences. And the main differences, I suppose, is the extremely large corpus we have of texts preserved in Old Norse, mainly preserved in Iceland from the 12th century onwards, and most of it in the vernacular. And secondly, within that corpus, there's a really broad range of secular literature in Old Norse, a much broader range of genres, secular genres, than in most other European medieval literatures. So it's a fantastic sort of treasure trove of texts for students to explore. Why it's so different is explored in more detail in the Scandinavian history paper to do with geography and history and institutions of power. But we also look into that to some extent in the Old Norse paper as well.
Fantastic. And what kind of texts do students get to study doing the Old Norse course?
That we cover 4 main areas in the Old Norse course. And the first one is a genre called Eddic poetry. There are lots of strange generic titles necessarily. And this is anonymous alliterative poetry set in the pre-Christian past. And it's often staged as very dramatic dialogues between gods and between legendary heroes, between Valkyries and prophetesses and all kinds of larger than life figures. And it's a really important source for the study of traditional Scandinavian culture, partly on its content, but also partly on its generic forms as dialogues. That source material is used by a 13th century scholar called Snorri Sturluson, and he wrote something called the Edda, or Snorri's Edda. And this is a treatise on poetics and mythology, which is extremely rich as source material. But it's also a really important way for us to find out what Christian Icelanders understood their cultural heritage to be, and the mechanisms, if you like, to explore that properly without it being offensive in a Christian context. Yeah. So they're two of the sort of more traditionally oriented genres that we look at. The really big genre, which is probably the one most other literatures are familiar with, is the saga. And the subgenre of the saga that we study in most detail are the Íslendingasögur, or family sagas. And these are sagas about the early families of Iceland, but they include sagas of exploration to North America or Greenland, called the Vinland sagas, and lots of sagas about, you know, people just settling in different valleys in Iceland. One of them is called Laxdæla Saga, which literally is the saga of the people of Salmon River Valley. And we explore quite a few of those sagas in the course. And the fourth element is another kind of poetry called Skaldic poetry. And this is praise poetry in very complex meters, which also includes lots of kennings or poetic circumlocutions. And these are familiar from Old English as well, but in Skaldic poetry, it's taken to a really refined art. And it's a kenning is the mechanism of calling a ship a horse of the waves. And there are more developed ways of doing that.
Yeah. When I was a student in ASNC, Skaldic verse was absolutely my favourite thing, because they were like brain teasers. Could you tempt us with a few more kennings, because that's my favourite part.
Yeah, they are fantastic. So grass would be called plumage of the earth. There's always a disjunction between the kind of semantic fields that you're drawing together to kind of work out the riddle. Sky, this isn't such a hard one. The sky is the wide awning of the cloud halls. Or using Mauni, which is the personification of the moon, the word for moon, the sky can be called the grey shirt of Mauni.
Wow, that's
which is quite appropriate
so
today.
poetic and vivid, aren't they? These kennings?
Yeah. A stone is a fjord apple. The land of the fjord apple is mountains, and the people of the land of the fjord apple would be giants. I'll just give you a few more.
Yeah, no, I'm hooked now.
Gold is known as the flame of the fjord, and there are zillions of gold kennings, and it's basically anything that shines underneath water. And so you have a huge range of shining words and water words.
Interesting that it's connected with water. That's really interesting.
Yeah. So it can be the sun of the current, the gleam of the wave. But gold is also the bed of the dragon, because gold was imagined to be hoarded by dragons. So a generous man who distributes wealth, which comes into play in praise poetry, could be called the foe of the reptile's lair.
Wow. Yes.
Silver can be described as ice for sort of obvious visual reasons. So a generous man could also be called the hater of arm ice. Wow. The one who distributes, who hates it, who gets rid of it, distributes silver arm rings. Just give you a few more from the world of the sea. I think sea kennings are my favourite.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's your favourite? Okay,
the sea is the salt track of the sea trout, the plain of puffins, the hollows of the herring. And in this context, a generous man could be described as the flinger of the fire of the roads of the redfish. Where the roads of the redfish is the sea, the fire of the sea is gold, and the flinger is the man who distributes it. Another one, the birch tree of the embers of the estuary.
That's very
Or the diminisher of the fires of the rushing path of the orca. Rushing path of the orca sea, fires of the sea, gold, diminisher, generous man. So they're just fantastic range. And because of all those sea kennings, you can therefore have a really large range of ship kennings. So instead of just the horse of the waves, you could have another example, which I also really like, is the horse of the road of the lobster.
Oh, cracking. Horse of the road of the lobster. It's really fantastic. We need to finish in a minute, but could you just give us one kenning in the original Old Norse so that we can hear what they sound like?
I'll give you the diminisher of the fires of the rushing path of the orca, which is Ferrir elda hrinslóða vögnu.
Oh, I'm longing to become an ASNC student again now. Thank you so much, Judy. I think we need to draw to a conclusion, but thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Ros.
Bye-bye.
Bye.